What is the greatest scientific discovery of all time? Story 1. Medically, penicillin, and it's honestly not even close. Before antibiotics, a scraped knee, a tooth infection, or childbirth could just end you. Surgery was basically a gamble with death. People didn't die from injuries so much as from the infections that followed them. Penicillin didn't just cure disease, it completely rewired humanity's relationship with risk. What makes it even crazier is how accidental it was. Mold contaminates a petri dish, someone notices bacteria dying around it, and suddenly the rules of medicine change forever. Entire classes of deaths just quietly stopped being normal. Life expectancy jumped, complex surgery became viable, cancer treatment, organ transplants, premature birth survival. None of that works without antibiotics in the background doing silent cleanup. It's also one of those discoveries whose importance you only notice when it's missing. Antibiotic resistance is already reminding us what the old world looked like, and it's not pretty. Penicillin didn't make us immortal, it just made dying from dumb, invisible stuff a lot less inevitable. And that alone probably saved more lives than any invention in history. Story 2. Fire. Full stop. Fire is the upgrade that turned animals into us. Cooking alone changed everything. More calories, less energy spent digesting, bigger brains, longer lives. Suddenly, food wasn't just eaten, it was transformed. Nature stopped being something we endured and started being something we controlled. Then there's warmth, light, protection. Night stopped being a hard limit. Cold climates became survivable. Predators became manageable. Communities could gather after dark and actually talk, which is probably where culture really started to snowball. Fire also unlocked every other leap. Metalworking, pottery, glass, tools, weapons, engines, electricity. Every major technological era is basically just a different way of using heat more precisely. Even modern tech still traces back to controlled fire somewhere in the chain. What's wild is that fire isn't even a thing. It's a process, a reaction. Humanity's first successful attempt at bossing physics around. And once we learned to keep it alive, everything else followed. No fire, no cities. No fire, no medicine. No fire, no science. Penicillin saved lives. Fire made civilization possible. Story 3. Black powder is a sleeper pick, but it's massive. It's the first time humans figured out how to store energy chemically and release it on command. Before that, force came from muscles, wind, water, or fire in a very loose sense. Black powder let us decide when and where violence, motion, and transformation happened. Instantly, mining changed overnight. You could shatter rock instead of chiseling it for months. Roads, tunnels, canals, and later railways became feasible at scale. That alone reshaped economies and geography. Whole regions became accessible because you could finally move Earth efficiently. Then there's warfare. Obviously, castles stopped working. Armor became obsolete. Power centralized. States modernized whether they wanted to or not. Politics stopped being about lineage and started being about logistics and production. But the quieter legacy matters too. Firearms drove standardization, interchangeable parts, mass manufacturing, quality control. Industrial organization didn't start with steam, it started with the need to reliably make things that explode. Black powder was the bridge between craft and industry. The moment chemistry became infrastructure. Steam engines get the credit for the Industrial Revolution, but black powder taught humanity how to weaponize chemistry long before we learned how to harness it peacefully. Once we learned that powders could change the world, the rest of industrial science was just refinement. Story 4. Electricity rewired civilization at every level. It turned energy into something you could sell by the unit, move instantly, and use anywhere. No more tying work to daylight, muscle, wind, or steam engines bolted to specific locations. Flip a switch and power shows up. Factories stopped clustering around rivers. Cities exploded upward and outward. Night became usable. Electricity also ended distance. Telegraph, telephone, radio, television, internet. All just different tricks for riding electrons. Commerce stopped being local and became global. Information itself turned into a commodity. Markets sped up until milliseconds mattered. Money became abstract, digital, frictionless. What really made it transformative was flexibility. The same grid runs lights, machines, hospitals, refrigerators, data centers, and life support systems. One discovery, infinite applications. No other energy source integrates so cleanly into every aspect of daily life. And it quietly reshaped human behavior. Workdays stretched, sleep patterns shifted, entertainment became constant. Entire industries appeared that literally couldn't exist without electrons moving through wires. Fire gave us control over nature. Electricity gave us control over time and space. It's so foundational now that we only notice it when it's gone. A power outage doesn't feel like inconvenience. It feels like society briefly reverting to an earlier century. Commercial civilization doesn't run on money. Money just rides on electricity. Story 5. The process to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and make ammonium nitrate. Fritz Haber won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for this. He also helped to develop poison gas for the central power. He went on to develop the basis for Zyklon B, which he originally developed as an insecticide, but was perverted by the SS to exterminate people. Homie was all in for Germany in World War I. Well-known German nationalist, head of German gas warfare program, hell, it was his idea. Chlorine gassed the crap out of Allied troops at Ypres, among other atrocities. Could have been modern chemistry's patron saint, but he chose violence. The irony is that his loyalty for Germany was paid back with being fired when the Germans took over in the 30s. Story 6. The scientific method itself might honestly be the biggest one of all. Not a tool, not a substance, not a technology, a way of thinking. A realization that the universe isn't ruled by whims, gods, or pure chaos, but by patterns that can be observed, tested, assume they're wrong, tested again, and refined. That reality is consistent enough to argue with. Before this idea, knowledge was mostly authority-based. Truth came from tradition, power, scripture, or vibes. The scientific method flipped that completely. It said, it doesn't matter who you are. If the experiment doesn't work, you're wrong. And if it works tomorrow, next year, and across the world, then you're onto something real. That single shift unlocked everything else. Medicine stopped being guesswork. Engineering stopped being trial and error folklore. Nature stopped being mysterious in a paralyzing way and became mysterious in an inviting way. Questions stopped being dangerous and became productive. What's wild is how humble it is. The scientific method bakes uncertainty right into the process. It assumes you're biased, limited, and probably wrong. And that's not a flaw. It's the feature. Progress doesn't come from being right. It comes from being less wrong over time. Story 7. Vaccines are one of those discoveries whose success actually hides their importance. They worked too well. Entire diseases that used to define childhood just vanished so quietly that people forgot how lethal they were. Polio wards, iron lungs, mass graves from measles, children blinded by infections we now treat as inconveniences, gone within a few generations. Not managed, not mitigated, erased. What makes vaccines so powerful isn't just individual protection, it's the collective effect. They don't just save you, they collapse transmission chains. They turn once inevitable outbreaks into historical footnotes. That kind of population-level protection is rare in medicine. Antibiotics treat after the fact. Vaccines stop the problem before it even starts. And the benefits compound across a lifetime. Childhood vaccination isn't just about surviving childhood, it's about reaching adulthood without accumulated damage. Better brain development, fewer disabilities, stronger immune baselines, longer lives that aren't quietly shaped by infections we never had to fight. The irony is that the better vaccines work, the harder they are to defend. When the threat disappears, the protection looks optional. People start judging vaccines by their side effects instead of by the counterfactual world where they don't exist. Story 8. Cultivation of crops is one of those discoveries that quietly locked in everything that came after. The moment humans figured out how to deliberately grow food instead of just finding it, we stopped living hand to mouth and started living in place. Surplus happened. And surplus is basically the root of civilization. You get stored food, which gives you time. Time gives you specialization. Farmers, builders, priests, rulers, engineers, artists. Cities only exist because not everyone has to spend all day hunting or gathering. Agriculture also completely rewired human society for better and worse. The population exploded. Hierarchies formed. Property became a thing. So did war, borders, inequality, and bureaucracy. You trade freedom and mobility for stability and scale. It's the original Faustian bargain. What's wild is how recent it is. For most of human history, we didn't farm. Then suddenly we did, and within a blink of evolutionary time, we had empires, writing, money, laws, and eventually science itself. Once you can reliably feed people, you can do everything else. Every modern problem traces back to this discovery. Every modern solution does too. Cultivation didn't just feed us, it anchored us to the future. Story 9, bread, is low-key. One of the most unhinged discoveries humans ever made. Like, imagine being some prehistoric person. You grind grass seeds into dust. Weird already. Then you're like, what if I add water to this? For no obvious reason. You leave it sitting out. It bubbles. At no point does that seem like a good sign. And instead of throwing it away, someone went, nah, let's cook it. And somehow it worked. Where did the yeast come from? The air. just floating around. Invisible microbes we wouldn't even know existed for another 10,000 years, casually dropping by like, hey, mind if we metabolize your dough? And if the temperature's wrong, they die. Too hot? Dead. Too cold? Dead. Too clean? Dead. But hit the Goldilocks zone and suddenly your sad wet paste turns into the foundation of civilization. And we didn't stop. We optimized it. We domesticated yeast before we knew what yeast was. We passed starters down generations like family heirlooms. Entire cultures built identities around bread. Wars were fought over grain. Religions used it symbolically. Give us this day our daily bread. Isn't poetry, it's logistic. Story 10. Cooking is one of those discoveries that feels obvious now, but it's borderline insane when you really think about it. At some point, humans decided to take perfectly good food and set it on fire. And instead of ruining it, that made it better, safer, easier to chew, easier to digest, more calories unlocked for the same effort. That single change basically subsidized our brains. Bigger brains, less time chewing, more energy to think, plan, talk, and eventually overthink everything. Cooking also lets us eat stuff that would straight up end us raw. Tubers, grains, meats full of parasites, fire turned inedible into staple. And then there's germs. Long before anyone had a clue what bacteria were, we accidentally figured out how to murder them with heat. Zero theory, perfect execution. And once you can cook, you can store food. Dry it. Smoke it. Ferment it. Suddenly, famine isn't just fate anymore. You can plan for winter. You can survive bad years. You can support people who aren't constantly hunting or gathering. Cooking is basically chemistry without knowing chemistry. It's controlled destruction that makes food more alive for us. Fire gave us warmth. Cooking gave us civilization. Everything else is just seasoning. Story 11. Maybe someone can remind me of where this came from, but there was this story set in the far-flung future where someone walks through a space museum of the greatest inventions of mankind. The protagonist walked past all these engines for interstellar travel, etc. And then in a place of honor, there were some pieces of broken pottery. They asked the curator why they were so revered, and the explanation was that one of our ancient ancestors noticed that this specific type of mud hardened permanently when placed next to a fire, and decided to make something, and all other human inventions arguably owed itself to that initial insight. 4012. This one is perfect, honestly. If you had to compress all of science into a single sentence, everything is made of atoms, does an insane amount of work. Tiny things, constantly moving, sticking together in different ways. And that's it. Chemistry, biology, materials, heat, pressure, life, death, stars, rocks, you, all just different arrangements and motions of the same basic stuff. What makes it such a god-tier sentence is that it's not just a fact, it's a framework. Once you accept it, a ridiculous amount of reality becomes explainable. Why are solids solid? Why gases spread out? Why things dissolve? Why temperature matters? Why reactions happen? Why is life possible at all? You can rebuild chemistry, then biology, then medicine, then industry, all from that starting point. And it's so counterintuitive. The world feels continuous and smooth, but nope, it's grainy underneath. Like reality is made of Lego bricks you can't see, endlessly rearranging themselves according to a few rules. Fire, electricity, cooking, medicine. All of those sit on top of this idea, their applications. The atomic hypothesis is the bedrock. If everything else vanished, that one sentence would let future humans claw their way back to almost everything we know. Not bad for a sentence that basically says, stuff is made of tiny stuff. Story 13. Relativity is one of those discoveries that permanently ruins your ability to think normally, ever again. Before Einstein, time was time, space was space, and everyone kind of assumed the universe ran on a shared clock in a big static box. Relativity showed that was completely wrong. Time stretches, space contracts. Simultaneity isn't real. The universe doesn't care about your intuition at all. What makes it so wild is that it's not abstract philosophy, it's measurable. Clocks literally tick slower when they move faster. GPS has to correct for relativity, or your phone would be wrong by kilometers. Gravity isn't a force pulling things. It's space-time bending and objects just following the curves like idiots rolling downhill. And then there's the existential part. There is no universal now. What's happening right now for you isn't the same for someone moving differently. Past, present, and future stop being absolute and start looking suspiciously like a perspective problem. Reality becomes observer-dependent in a way that feels illegal. Relativity didn't just explain the universe better. It told us that the universe is fundamentally stranger than the human brain evolved to handle. Our instincts about time and space are just wrong outside everyday speeds and scales. Story 15. Honestly, the pen is a killer answer. Not flashy, not science-y at first glance, But the pen is how knowledge escapes the brain. It's the bridge between one mind and another across time. Without it, every discovery dies with the person who made it, or survives only as a distorted story. The pen turned thoughts into artifacts. It lets ideas stack instead of reset. You don't have to rediscover math, medicine, astronomy, or law from scratch every generation. You inherit them. That's the real acceleration. Civilization isn't built on genius, it's built on memory that outlives people. Once you can write, you can argue with the past. You can refine ideas. You can prove someone wrong centuries later. You can coordinate thousands of people who you have never met. You can invent contracts, science papers, blueprints, literature, laws, religions, and revolutions. Every other discovery in this thread spreads because of the pen. The scientific method? Written. Relativity? Written. Vaccines? Written protocols. Agriculture? Written records. Without writing, progress is fragile and local. With it, progress becomes cumulative and global. The pen isn't powerful because it creates ideas. It's powerful because it preserves and transmits them. Story 16. Germ theory is one of those discoveries that quietly flipped reality upside down. Before it, people knew disease was real but had absolutely unhinged explanations for it. Bad air, evil spirits, imbalanced humors, moral failure. You could do everything right and still die horribly from an infection because no one understood what was actually doing the ending. Then comes the idea that tiny, invisible organisms are responsible. Not curses, not vibes, not God being mad, just microscopic life doing its thing. And suddenly everything makes sense. Why hand washing works. Why do wounds get infected? Why outbreaks spread the way they do? Why sterilization matters? Why clean water is basically a superpower. What's wild is how recent this is. People were performing surgery without washing their hands less than 200 years ago. Doctors were literally ending patients and then wondering why mortality was so high. Once germ theory clicked, death rates fell off a cliff. Not gradually, immediately. And it didn't just change medicine. It changed psychology and morality. Getting sick stopped being a personal failing. Cleanliness stopped being superstition and became science. Prevention became possible. Vaccines, antibiotics, sanitation, food safety, all downstream of this one idea. Story 17. The Haber-Bosch process is one of those discoveries that feels almost too big to wrap your head around. It's literally how we learn to pull food out of thin air. Nitrogen is everywhere, most of the atmosphere, but plants can't use it like that. For most of history, agriculture was hard capped by natural fertilizer, manure, crop rotation, bird crap if you were lucky. Population growth always ran straight into famine. Then someone figures out how to brute force nitrogen into ammonia at industrial scale. Suddenly, fertilizer isn't scarce. Yields explode. The ceiling on how many humans the planet can support gets kicked way upward almost overnight. About half of the people alive today are alive because of this process. That's not a metaphor. Their calories trace back to ammonia synthesized in a reactor. If Haber-Bosch vanished tomorrow, modern civilization would collapse within years. Not hypothetically, logistically. What's extra wild and uncomfortable is the dual use. The same process that feeds billions also made explosives cheaper and wars deadlier. Same chemistry, different intent. It's one of the cleanest examples of how science itself is morally neutral and outcomes depend entirely on how humans deploy it. Story 18. The Industrial Revolution wasn't about gadgets, it was about escaping biological limits. Before it, almost all human labor was muscle-powered. Yours, animals, or maybe wind and water if you were lucky. Productivity scaled slowly and painfully. Most people spent most of their lives just trying to not starve, freeze, or die of something stupid. Then we figured out how to turn heat into motion reliably and at scale. Steam engines, later internal combustion and electricity. Suddenly one person plus a machine could do the work of hundreds. Food got cheaper. Clothes got cheaper. Transport got faster. Cities exploded. Life expectancies shot up. Child mortality dropped off a cliff. Even the concept of free time only really exists because of that shift. Computers optimize things. The Industrial Revolution made optimization worth doing. It also explains why its impacts feel so much bigger. Industrialization touched everything physical: housing, sanitation, medicine, food supply, transportation, energy. Computers mostly rearrange information and efficiency on top of that foundation. Huge, yes, but layered. If you had to pick the ignition point, it's not silicon. It's cheap, controllable energy plus mass production. Once you break that barrier, everything else becomes possible. Story 19. Anesthesia is one of those discoveries that doesn't get hyped enough because people forget how bad things were before it. Surgery used to be straight up medieval horror. No pain control, no mercy. Your best case was alcohol, a stick to bite, and a surgeon who worked fast. People didn't just fear surgery, they avoided it until death was basically guaranteed, because being cut open while fully conscious is something the human brain is absolutely not built to endure. Then anesthesia shows up and casually deletes pain from the equation. Suddenly, surgeons can take their time. Precision becomes possible. Complex procedures stop being suicide missions. Modern medicine basically unlocks overnight. Organ surgery, cancer removal, C-sections, trauma care, none of that exists without the ability to turn off suffering temporarily. And the wild part is that anesthesia doesn't just block pain, it suspends you, consciousness off. Time skip. You go under, wake up later, and your body has been radically altered while you weren't there. That's borderline sci-fi, and we just accept it as normal now. Story 20. The printing press is one of those discoveries that doesn't look violent or dramatic, but absolutely detonates society. Before it, books were luxury items, hand-copied, slow, expensive, and controlled by the wealthy, the church, or the state. Knowledge moved at a crawl and mostly stayed locked behind power. If you wanted information, you needed access to the right people. Then suddenly you could mass-produce ideas. Costs dropped, books spread, literacy mattered, and information stopped being scarce. Ordinary people could read the same things elites read. Opinions could propagate without permission. Errors could be spotted, arguments could be challenged, and authority could be questioned with receipts. The printing press didn't just spread knowledge, it standardized it. Same text, same ideas, same facts across huge distances. That's what made science, education, and political movements scalable. Reformations, revolutions, public education, newspapers, modern democracy, all downstream. It's also why power freaked out. Censorship, banned books, controlled presses. Turns out, ideas are harder to contain once they're cheap. Story 21. Writing. The concept of using symbols and marks, whether on parchment, papyrus, paper, or embossed on clay or knots tied on a string, to communicate is itself a psychotechnology and a scientific discovery. Prior to that, communication was limited to verbal interactions and gestures done in the presence of someone. Writing enabled us to communicate across time and across distance with a level of fidelity that memory could not ensure. I contend that this is the greatest discovery of all. Many of the other discoveries would not even have happened had human civilization not developed writing. Story 22. Refrigeration. This one gets hard, but it quietly changes everything. Before refrigeration, food dictated your entire life. You ate what was available, when it was available, and spoiled food ending people all the time. Cities couldn't grow too large because feeding them was a logistical nightmare. Milk was a gamble. Meat was a race against rot. Entire cuisines existed mainly to slow decay. Then we figured out how to reliably make things cold. Suddenly, food could be stored, transported, and shared across huge distances. You didn't have to live next to your food source anymore. Urbanization exploded. Global trade became practical. Seasonal starvation mostly disappeared in industrialized societies. Medicine benefited too. Vaccines, blood, organs, insulin, all depend on cold chains. It also changed daily life in subtle ways. Less time preserving food, more time living. Diets became more varied. Food safety became an expectation instead of a hope. Refrigeration doesn't feel like a great discovery because it's invisible when it works, but take it away and modern life collapses fast. Story 23. The telescope is one of those discoveries that didn't just add information, it humiliated us, in the best possible way. Before telescopes, the universe revolved around vibes. Earth felt central, so obviously it was. The sky looked clean and perfect, so clearly it was divine and immutable. Then someone points a tube with glass at the heavens, and immediately everything starts falling apart. Mountains on the moon, spots on the sun, moons orbiting Jupiter instead of Earth. Suddenly we're not special, not central, not even particularly important. Just another thing going around something else. That single instrument shattered thousands of years of certainty in like a decade. What makes the telescope so powerful is that it extends human senses beyond their natural limits. It was the first time we could say, actually, let's not guess, let's look. And once you do that, authority loses its grip fast. The universe stops caring what you believe and starts showing you what it is. And it never stopped paying off. Bigger telescopes, better optics, space telescopes. Now we're looking back billions of years, watching galaxies form, seeing planets around other stars, measuring the expansion of the universe itself. Story 24. Glasses are one of those inventions that are so normal now we forget how insane they actually are. For most of human history, if your vision sucked, that was just it. Your world slowly got blurrier, your usefulness dropped, your independence shrank, and eventually you were just done earlier than everyone else. No fix, no workaround, just vibes and squinting. Then someone figured out that you could bend light with shaped glass and correct the human eye. That's wild. We didn't fix the body, we hacked physics instead. Slap 2 pieces of curved sand on your face and suddenly you can read, work, hunt, sew, build, learn, live normally again. Think about how much knowledge was preserved because smart people didn't go functionally blind at 40 anymore. Scientists, scribes, engineers, craftsmen, doctors, all kept contributing decades longer because of glasses. Civilization quietly leveled up because people could still see their own work. And it's such a low-tech miracle. No electricity, no medicine, no surgery, just optics doing their thing. Glasses didn't make us stronger or faster, they made us able, which is arguably one of the most humane scientific discoveries ever. Story 25. The internet is one of those discoveries that feels like cheating. It didn't just improve communication, it collapsed distance entirely. Information stopped living in places and started living everywhere. Knowledge that used to take years to access now takes seconds. You can learn almost anything, talk to almost anyone, find communities that would have been impossible to encounter otherwise, all from a glowing rectangle in your pocket. It's basically the printing press, the library, the post office, the phone, the TV, and the town square smashed together and turned up to 11. What makes it insane is the scale. One person can publish something and reach millions. A random comment can outlive its author. Entire movements, careers, friendships, and subcultures exist only because the internet makes coordination effortless. Geography stopped being destiny. Of course, it also broke a lot of stuff. Attention spans, privacy, trust, mental health, truth itself. We handed everyone a megaphone and forgot to install brakes. But even that chaos is a side effect of just how powerful it is. The internet didn't make humans smarter or kinder, it made us louder and more connected than our brains were designed to handle. Love it or hate it, it's the closest thing we've ever made to a planetary nervous system, and we're still very clearly in the figuring out what the hell we just built. Story 26. Radar is one of those discoveries that feels almost unfair once you realize what it actually did. We figured out how to see without seeing, to detect objects miles away, through darkness, fog, clouds, storms, without eyes, without light, just by yelling radio waves into the void and listening for the echo. That's borderline wizardry. Militarily, it completely rewrote the rules. Surprise attacks became harder. Air warfare changed overnight. Navies stopped sailing blind. Entire battles were won or lost before the enemy even knew they'd been spotted. World War II looks very different without radar, but the civilian impact is just as huge. Air traffic control, weather forecasting, storm tracking, ships not smashing into each other in fog, speed traps, astronomy. Even modern self-driving tech traces back to radar logic. It quietly made the world safer by letting us anticipate danger instead of reacting too late. What's wild is how invisible it is. You never see radar working. You just benefit from the fact that planes don't crash into each other and hurricanes don't show up as complete surprises. Radar didn't change how we live day to day in an obvious way. It changed how often we don't die, which is kind of the best kind of scientific discovery. Story 27. Sanitation and clean water might be the most brutally underappreciated scientific advance of all time. Before it, cities were basically slow-motion mass graves. Human waste went into the streets, rivers doubled as sewers, drinking water was a roulette wheel, and disease wasn't a crisis. It was background noise. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, parasites, infections you didn't even bother naming because everyone got them. Infant mortality was horrifyingly high. Living past childhood was an achievement. What's wild is that sanitation saves lives without anyone realizing it at first. No dramatic cure. No heroic surgery, just fewer people dying. Mortality rates dropped quietly, steadily, and permanently once sewage was separated from drinking water. Life expectancy didn't inch up, it jumped. And it wasn't just about pipes. It was about understanding cause and effect. That sickness wasn't divine punishment or bad air, but contamination. Once that clicked, entire cities were redesigned around health instead of convenience. Sanitation also scaled civilization. You simply cannot have millions of people living close together without waste management. Skyscrapers, subways, megacities, none of it works if crap and drinking water mix. The modern world would collapse in weeks without sanitation. Story 28. Accurate timekeeping is one of those discoveries that sounds boring until you realize it's holding the entire modern world together with duct tape and math. For most of human history, time was vibes. Sunrise, sunset, maybe noon if you had a shadow. That worked fine until you tried to coordinate anything bigger than a village. The moment societies got complex, fuzzy time became a liability. The real breakthrough wasn't knowing what time it is. It was knowing the same time as everyone else. Accurate clocks solved navigation first. Longitude was basically unsolvable without them. Entire ships vanished because sailors didn't know where they were. Once you could keep precise time at sea, the planet suddenly became mappable. Trade exploded. Empires expanded. The world shrank. Then industry showed up and demanded precision. Trains can't run on vibes. You need synchronized schedules or people die. Factories need coordinated shifts. Markets need opening times. Eventually, electricity grids, telecoms, and computers all demanded time accuracy down to fractions of a second. Fast forward, and now we're running civilization on atomic clocks. GPS literally does not work without relativistic time corrections. Your phone knowing where it is depends on clocks so accurate they'd lose less than a second over millions of years. What's insane is that timekeeping doesn't just organize society, it creates trust. When everyone agrees on time, coordination becomes possible at massive scales. Without it, everything fragments. Story 29. Understanding vacuum and air pressure is one of those discoveries that feels abstract until you realize it's everywhere, all the time, doing the heavy lifting. For a long time, humans thought air was basically nothing, empty, background. Then we figured out that nothing actually pushes. That air has weight, pressure, and rules. And the moment that clicked, the universe became usable in a whole new way. Once you understand pressure, you can move things without touching. Pumps work. Engines work. You can pull water uphill. You can drain mines. You can move fluids through pipes instead of buckets. Suddenly, cities don't have to sit right next to rivers anymore. It also unlocked engines and power. Steam engines, internal combustion, turbines, all of them rely on pressure differentials. No understanding of vacuum, no industrial revolution, period. Medicine benefited too. Ventilators, blood pressure, sterilization, suction. Even basic things like syringes stop being mysterious. Flight is literally just exploiting pressure differences. Weather forecasting, pressure. Refrigeration, pressure. Space travel, pressure management is the entire game. What's wild is how counterintuitive it is. We don't feel air most of the time, so it's easy to forget it's crushing us with tons of force constantly. The fact that our bodies don't implode is already a miracle of equilibrium. Once we realized that empty space isn't empty, humanity stopped treating the atmosphere like a mystery and started treating it like a machine. Story 30. Statistics and probability are one of those discoveries that didn't change the world loudly. They changed it correctly. Before statistics, humans were absolutely ruled by anecdotes. One bad outcome meant something was dangerous forever. One good outcome meant it was safe. Decisions were made on vibes, superstition, authority, and whoever told the best story. And honestly, our brains are still hardwired for that. Statistics taught us how to think when certainty isn't available, which is basically always. Once we figured out the probability, we stopped asking, did this happen? And started asking, how often does this happen? Compared to what we'd expect by chance. That single shift is why modern medicine works. Clinical trials, risk factors, side effects, survival rates. Without statistics, medicine is just very confident guesswork. It also underpins everything boring and essential. Insurance exists because probability exists. Engineering tolerances, quality control, polling, climate models, economics, epidemiology. Even AI is basically probability wearing a trench coat. What makes it especially humbling is that statistics constantly reminds us how bad we are at intuition. We overestimate rare risks, underestimate common ones, see patterns that aren't there, and ignore ones that are. Statistics don't care about how something feels. It cares about what the numbers do over time. And we still misuse it constantly, which tells you how powerful it is. If it were weak, no one would bother lying with it.